another DMI Economic Development Committee. We've got a fantastic panel today to talk about TID 25 and the importance of TID 25. It is fantastic. We're letting a few more people in here. Just going to give it another second before we get going. I hope you guys are all having a good day and having a good week. And I hope you all come downtown at some point and support our favorite State Street or the Capitol Square, Cap East, Regent Street, wherever it is. Come and support downtown. All right. We're going to get started. It looks like we've got everyone in here. We're going to begin, as always, with our chair, Ann Morrison. Good morning, Ann. How are you?
Good morning, Jason. I'm great. I'm hoping for a nicer day and concerts on the square in person on the rectangle down at Breeze Stevens. So it looks nice out. We are looking forward to seeing you all in person at upcoming meetings soon. But in the meantime, this is hopefully one of our last fully virtual meetings. And what this virtual meeting allowed us to do is to bring in this amazing panel very quickly. So I want to thank them all for being here, which otherwise couldn't have happened if we weren't virtual. So silver lining. With that, I think we're going to start the meeting. Before we jump into our panel, Jason's going to give us a couple updates as a committee, both on DMI's statement on BRT and an announcement about What's Up Downtown, our next event. Jason.
Thank you, Ann, very much. Oh, sorry. Well, thank you, Ann, very much. I was a little fast there. So as Ann mentioned before, yesterday, DMI released a statement on State Street and the BRT. I'm going to read that statement out today, and there's been certainly plenty of media coverage happening. So you can get it from there. Downtown Madison, Inc. strongly supports bus rapid transit. However, we join other stakeholders in opposition of the proposed routes downtown and the placement of stations on State Street and the Capitol Square. We have reached this decision through ongoing conversations with the community, residents, small business owners, property owners, Madison Central Business Improvement District, the City of Madison, alders, and other stakeholders. We insist on having an inclusive conversation to find a mutually agreed upon compromise for alternative station locations that best serve BRT riders and will not disrupt business. Ultimately, we share the mayor's goals to build a vibrant, economically strong, equitable downtown where everyone feels welcome. We are confident that together we can achieve this common goal, which includes the exciting addition of BRT. So several news stories. We'll focus more on that as well over the next couple of days. For certainly, comments, concerns, let me know. Send me an email. I'd love to chat on that subject as well. In other news, other exciting news, we are going back live with our What's Up Downtown breakfast a week from today, July 22nd, 7:30 a.m. Yes, I said that right, 7:30 a.m. We've slid it up a little bit to give us a little more time. 7:30 a.m. at the Edgewater Hotel. The presentation, though, as always, won't begin until about 8 to 10. So a nice little happy hour we have in the front of it. We are so excited to have Morgan Ramaker, our own board member and executive director of B-Cycle, to talk about the impact of B-Cycle, transportation, everything that's happening in the world of electric bikes and trek. There's so much there. Morgan's going to be giving the presentation live, but this isn't just a live meeting. This is going to be a hybrid. So this is going to be the future for us. Madeline and John and Carol Ann have been doing an amazing job getting ready for this meeting. So you can join us by Zoom as well as attend live at the Edgewater Hotel. We do need registration though, because we do have a limited amount of spots as we walk into running these live events. We also will have live New Faces, New Places in August at a great property at ULI on the deck there. So I cannot remember the date. It's early in August. Hopefully you'll see us there. That is a live event as well. And as Ann mentioned, we are transitioning the committees over to hybrid structure, committee by committee. We've got membership development and a few others coming on, and we hope to have the next economic development committee in a hybrid version where you can either attend live or via Zoom. So there is my update. Ann, I will send it back to you to begin today's panel because Ann has nicely given me the day off in moderating, and she said she would moderate this panel. So I am very thankful. Ann, back.
Well, good. Well, this is an easy job. This is an exciting topic to talk about that I'm sure we'll have tons of questions on. And this panel on TIF and TID 25 was really prompted by one of our DMI members, Ben Schmidt from Fiore, upon reading Dean Mosman's recent article. Madison TIF district closure will deliver $30 million windfall was on the cover of the paper not too long ago. This committee has talked about TIF before. We have a white paper that we did to kind of inform people about what TIF is and what it means that came out a couple of years ago. I think that is something that this committee will probably refresh in the future. And so this is a really timely topic for us to get updated on the closure of this TIF and what it means. TIF is amazing tool to spur investments in downtown. It's really the primary tool that the city has to spur development. So we're really excited to have this panel. Thank you all for joining us. Today we have Alder Mike Verveer, Downtown District 4 Alder, who sponsored the original resolution to create TID 25. Matt Mikolajewski, Director of the City of Madison Economic Development Division, and Jason Stein, Research Director at the Policy Forum, whose public policy research group has produced several pieces on TIF. So, and of course, I will try not to add too much commentary, but again, I'm Ann Newyar Morrison. I'm one of the shareholders of Urban Land Interests, who received a TID loan for our Block 89 and Anchor Bank properties, without which, but for those properties, that loan would not, those properties would not have happened. So we really do, as a company, ULI, value TID and what it means for a kind of revitalizing downtown, and the history. We have a big history with that with our company. So with that, I don't think we need, do you guys, I think, want to do introductions, or should we just go straight into the questions? I think most of us all know you, and maybe as you answer the first question, you can say a little bit about who, add anything else that I might have missed that you want to share with the audience about who you are. So I think we're going to start maybe, Jason, why don't we pull up that map so that folks know what TID 25 is. And I think Matt's going to help us understand this map and the boundaries and what's in it. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt Mikolajewski, Director of Economic Development. Matt.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you and Jason for inviting me this morning. It's great to see all of you, and it's especially great that we are starting to see one another in person. And I look forward to my next DMI event to be one that we actually can see one another face to face rather than Zoom. As Ann mentioned, the image on the screen is the TID 25 boundary. And you can see that it extends basically along the Doty Street and Wilson Street corridor on the west, extending all the way to Wilson Street, and then heading all the way towards Machinery Row, sort of on the far southeast corner of the TID. And the TID, what you see on the map, is an image of the boundary of TID 25, and it includes all of the TIF projects that have been funded in the downtown in this general area. So not all of these projects that you see on this map are TID 25 projects, but many of them are. Most notably, the major development projects that TID 25 has funded throughout its life include the Madison Mark apartment building, Block 89, as Ann mentioned, the Union Transfer condo project, the Hilton Hotel, and most recently, our brand new Wilson Street garage. And with that, I guess I'll turn it over to the first question, unless there's any other questions about the boundary of the district itself.
Thank you, Matt. And this is one of 3 downtown TIDs that we have created. Is that correct? Okay. So our first question and we'll kind of throw this out to the panel. I think we're going to kind of try to keep this conversational. So we don't mind if you guys, the panelists, jump in and interrupt each other, add, commentary, pick up where each other left off. And then we'll also have the question, we'll have our Q&A chat going on the side. And as appropriate, I'll try to interject with anything that comes up that we can include as we roll along, and we'll certainly have time for questions at the end. So the first question that we had was really, why are we here today? Why are we here talking about this kind of obscure, for some, financing tool? What does it mean to downtown development, and why is it so important? And I don't know who wants to take that first. Mike, do you want to take it, Verveer or Jason? Why does TIF matter? Why are we here, DMI, talking about it?
Thank you, Ann, and thank you all for being here this morning. Good morning, one and all. I have to admit that it's wonderful having the opportunity today to talk about something besides BRT downtown. So I appreciate you allowing me that opportunity, and it's amazing to have such a huge crowd here. especially coming on the heels of a rather late but very thrilling Bucks game last night. This obviously isn't a TIF 101 webinar, so I think each and every one of you, as Ann alluded to at the outset, very much is familiar with TIF, so we don't have to really cover that whatsoever, probably in any great detail. I will say that I think I was invited to this panel in large part as the resident historian and being able to provide color commentary because, as Ann mentioned in her introduction, I actually did not only sponsor the original TIF 25 creation resolution back in 1995, but I also am sponsoring the dissolution of the TID 25 district that will be considered by the City Council at our next meeting on Tuesday evening. So it's been full circle for me. In fact, I ran into George Austin the other day at an Overture Center event, and George and I were taking a fun trip down memory lane, congratulating one another. It brought back a lot of good memories to talk about the last 25 plus years of how powerful TID 25 has been for downtown revitalization. And as I say, it's really been an honor and privilege that I've been able to be there for all of it. So, to explain, and obviously Block 89 has already been mentioned more than once, and very rightfully so. But when I was approached by George and our former TIF coordinator, Jerry Tucker, for those that don't know the fun fact, the father of our soon-to-be building inspection director, Matt Tucker, who, if you didn't know, was being promoted from zoning administrator, succeeding George Hank, who's taking a well-deserved retirement tomorrow. In any event, when George and Jerry approached me back in '95, they told me about some opportunities that were critical to the city's health, not just the downtown's health, but the city's well-being. You all wouldn't be a part of DMI if you didn't fully prescribe to the theory, the wisdom, the truism that without the health of the central city, the core of our community, the entire community would be much less off. Just of course, the tax base alone, the property values in the downtown is what in significant ways provides government services throughout the whole community at every level of government. So those two projects that I recall George and Jerry coming to me with, of course, were something that a couple of nice fellows that I'm sure need no introduction with any of you, and certainly not with Ann, by the name of Tom Newyar and Brad Benkowski had for Block 89. By the way, it's George that has always taught me to use the historic city block terminology for the downtown. So for Block 89, and then of course, wanting to help finance a headquarters hotel to allow Monona Terrace to reach its full potential, as Monona Terrace construction was underway at that point. So all these, 25 plus years later, we can say without question that but for, and I'm convinced, but for TID 25, we would not only have seen amazing projects like Block 89, which is by far the most highly valued block in the entire city of Madison, but we wouldn't see the success that Monona Terrace has had pre-pandemic, and will soon go back to their successful ways post-pandemic. We wouldn't see the overall revitalization of the downtown. I know many of you here this morning have resided in Madison even much longer than I have, but when I was first elected, all those many years ago now, the downtown was desolate in so many respects. The Capitol Square had so many vacant storefronts. You had to count on more than one hand. Downtown, in many respects, was a ghost town at night. There weren't a lot of permanent residents living in the downtown area. It was highly transient, not that it isn't today. We had a red light district, of course, east of the square. Crime was significantly worse off in so many respects than it is today, among other indicators I'd mentioned here. So, but for the power of TID and as was mentioned already in the introduction, really the most powerful tool that we have in the state of Wisconsin for redevelopment. And I know Jason's an expert on that statewide and can certainly get into that further for us. But there simply, I don't think, would have been the rapid progress that we saw in downtown revitalization, again, beginning in the 1990s. Lastly, let me just say at this point too, the Renaissance absolutely in such fantastic ways included a rebirth of the idea of downtown living, whether they were owner-occupied condo projects or multifamily rental projects. TID 25 financed those, that but for TID 25, they probably would not be there, including Madison Mark. That is, if you're not familiar with Madison Mark, between King Street and East Wilson Street, of course, is a Stonehouse development project that Rich and Helen developed that does provide low-cost housing for so many of the residents, always has, and hopefully will for many years in the future. Again, they received a TID grant among other city financial assistance. But the late great Todd McGrath, for example, as I sit here in my home this morning, Todd developed the Bassett neighborhood condo that I reside in that didn't receive any TIF funding. But so many of the original McGrath TIF projects, including his early partners, Joe Krupp and Jerry Pazdo's projects, for example, the Block 49 innovative projects. Block 49 is the block bordered by West Wilson, Broome, Henry, and Doty, and the investments that Todd and his partners made in the first settlement neighborhood would not have happened but for TID 25. So I appreciate, again, the opportunity to be here and look forward to continuing the conversation.
It's a great introduction. Maybe I can kick this over to Jason, if you don't mind. As Mike mentioned, you know a lot about TIF throughout the state and how it's been used. And maybe you could talk about how it is used, but also about, what other tools there really were, if any, to accomplish what TIF has done in downtown Madison.
Well, I think that's sort of the key thing to understand as someone, people who are interested in economic development in Madison, in Wisconsin. You think about, okay, what tools do we have as a community or within the state of Wisconsin to work on economic development? And, at the local level, there's not that many. There are more at the state level, but there are no in Wisconsin, there are no municipal sales taxes almost to speak of. Certainly Madison does not have one. There's nothing like a municipal income tax. There's nothing like that. There's only really mainly the property tax in terms of local revenue. And the state generally under the Constitution doesn't let municipalities provide incentives to the property tax directly. And so it's really TIF that serves as your vehicle that a local, someone in Matt's position, a lever that he can pull to try and, get something to happen that wasn't otherwise going to happen, or try and get something to happen in a different way. And we can sort of, Madison does not necessarily use TIF at the rate that some other communities use it, but it certainly has many TIFs and many TIF projects nonetheless. And that's just sort of a key thing to understand about Wisconsin, is that there are other states where there's just possibilities outside of TIF that just don't exist here.
Matt, do you want to add to that? I see you about how you view TIF in your toolkit and how the city's been using it and the history of use maybe in downtown.
Sure, happy to. As Ann, as you mentioned earlier, in addition to TID 25, we've had several TID districts and very successful TID districts through various areas in downtown. There was TID 32, which is the old State Street TID. There's currently TID 45, which is on the sort of west side of the square. And as Jason mentioned, TIF is really the only significant tool that we have as municipalities within the state to help foster development and employment-related projects. And it's critical within downtowns, and we see this throughout Wisconsin. I don't think you can find a city of any significant size in the state that doesn't have a TIF district in its downtown, and working with TIF to make these development projects happen. Downtown development is challenging. You often have demolition of older buildings. You often have environmental contamination. In many communities, you have poor soils, you have parking. You usually have a desire for more dense development that has increased construction costs, more attractive development, requiring, again, greater construction costs. So really to foster that downtown development and to compensate for those added costs that developers have in the downtown, TIF is really the only tool at our disposal to make that happen. And so, as you mentioned earlier, we've had several TIF districts throughout the history of TIF in Madison. Actually, the very first TIF project in Madison was the Fauerbach condos. I believe it was that project was funded with TIF back in 1977. So, it's long played an important role in the health of downtown, and will continue to play an important role in the future of downtown.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think, as someone mentioned in the chat, TID 25 has contributed, and Block 89, among other projects, it made a huge contribution to downtown and to the city. But if Matt, could you talk a little more about why you think this TID was most successful, or is considered successful, and what makes it unique?
That's actually a great question. When you consider why TID 25 is successful, it's interesting when you actually look at the amount of private development that was leveraged based on the public investment. It's actually not that remarkable of a TID, and we actually have TIDs. TID 32, the old State Street TID, was actually a good example of one that had a far greater financial return when you only look at property tax revenue. And I think this is an important lesson for TID 25, that the real benefit of TID 25 isn't, in fact, the direct monetary benefit from property taxes that it's generated, but it's all of the additional development that it has spurred in that area of the square, as Alder Verveer mentioned earlier. And I think it's an important lesson that TID 25 has taught us, which is that you don't have to necessarily be sort of the best financially performing TID in the community to have a tremendous impact. And I think that's something that we can consider moving forward as we use TIF citywide, is that it's not necessarily the direct private investment that it leverages within the TID, but it's what impact that district can have on the surrounding area as well. And so I think that's really why TID 25 has been successful, is that it has not just spurred development within the district, but in that entire area of downtown.
Yeah, thank you for that background. Yeah, I think what makes a TID successful, how do you look at that? What are the measures of it, are important to consider as we look at new TIFs outside of downtown as well. Mike, do you have anything more to add on the success of specifically TID 25 and what you think makes it unique?
Well, I certainly agree with Matt's analysis. Again, given my tenure here, I have also enjoyed the absolutely bottom line success of both the TID 32 that Matt has mentioned a couple of times, that again is a greater State Street TID, now of course closed, as well as TID 28 here in the Bassett neighborhood where I am this morning. Both of those districts were performed with tremendous gusto, not in terms of only in terms of the amount of private investment and public infrastructure that we were able to invest in all three of these TIDs, really. Again, the two huge ones that have now come and gone downtown, but also of course TID 25 that will be open until next year. And by the way, the reason why we're closing it is because it frankly, not only the city of Madison, but our other partners in local government are finding that we really need to take early withdrawal of the tremendous $30 million surplus that we find in the TID 25 fund to help balance our budgets to get out of the pandemic here, our respective budgets. In fact, I ran into a school board member the other day at the Tinsmith grand opening, and he shared with me how appreciative his school board colleagues were that will be providing the school board almost $5 million, Madison Metropolitan School District, with about $5 million when all is said and done from this $30 million surplus. Well, anyway, so absolutely, it spurred development. But for TID 25, we wouldn't have had the direct investment of about $67 million or so, both in private and public investment there. A lot of the public infrastructure in that map that Jason shared at the outset of our conversation here was funded practically 100%. We still have an assessment policy for certain types of public works projects, so there's a percentage that many of you as property owners would be paying. But the vast majority of all the public infrastructure, all the improvements there, for example, the relatively new Wilson Street garage, formerly Government East garage that Matt mentioned earlier, they just wouldn't have been possible but for TID. I mean, Susan, I see our old friend Susan Schmitz is in the meeting here this morning. As Susan well knows, we lobbied along with others, the legislature together, to change the statute to allow for TID investment to be used in public parking facilities rather than just private parking facilities like at Block 89 or the Hilton Madison. So in so many respects, TID 25 is really special. I mean, just the breadth of investment that we were able to make, everything, as I say, from public infrastructure to affordable housing to what is now the highest valued, and it has been for a long time, highest valued block in the city, ULI's Block 89, and on and on. It really was very special what we were able to accomplish there. But depending on the parameter, in fact, when Dean Mosman interviewed me for that story that you mentioned, and I said it depends how you look at it. I don't think it was the most successful probably in the history of the city or Wisconsin. That distinction might still be with former TIDs 28 and 32 in terms of our experience in Madison, but certainly TID 25 is right up there with so many monumental projects that spurred then more and more of a renaissance downtown. It all the way around, it was a huge success, to be sure.
Thank you. Yeah, we, as ULI, and I think a lot of, as wearing a DMI hat too, think a lot of the success of the new developments that were, funded in part through TIF loans is really the restoration of kind of street level activity, the undergrounding of parking, the removal of surface parking, creating an infrastructure that is some ways private, that parking, but also is available to the public to park, public events such as, farmers market, concerts on square, all the other reasons people come downtown into the convention center. You're talking about a couple different TIDs. They are 3 different TIDs that are all cited as super successful, all downtown and now all closed. And so I want to go to the chat for a minute to talk about a question from Craig Stanley that came up. We're all admitting that this is a very strong economic development tool, just like the school district, downtown is struggling coming out of the pandemic. And we're hearing that from a lot of our retailers on State Street. We're hearing it from a lot of our other businesses downtown. So if this is such a powerful tool and we don't have any open TIDs, why does it feels to many that the pendulum has swung so far away from supporting and promoting TIF to being not as desirable a tool to use. And so is that the case, I guess? And do you think we're going to see more TIDs downtown being proposed? What's going on in terms of appetite for TID, and how does that apply to downtown?
Well,
anyone can take that question.
I could just pop in with a little bit of context there. I mean, the first thing that I would say is, although it is true that TID 25 is not the largest, it is certainly nothing to sneeze at least in the numbers that I really quickly reviewed, and hopefully I didn't get myself in trouble quickly reviewing them. But the DOR numbers that I quickly reviewed before this showed me that it was still in the top 10 TIDs statewide, or top 20, excuse me, TIDs statewide in terms of increment value. So it's, you know, still nothing to sneeze at in terms of its size. And then in terms of just Madison, I mean, it has been a couple of years since we've looked at this. And so the data is a little bit old, but, you know, when we looked at it last for data in 2018, when you look statewide at total property value in TIDs, you had about 6.4%. Milwaukee had also over the past 20 years sort of caught up from being, you know, about half that to actually being right at the statewide average when we looked at it. Madison is somewhat below it. So Madison is a little under 3% in 2018. So, you know, I think sometimes in Madison, you know, we are a big community. We have a lot of projects happening. And so I think sometimes you can get the impression like, oh, you know, we're using TID at this rate that, you know, it's amazing or something. But, you know, we're somewhat, at least in the last data that we looked at, somewhat less than a typical rate. So the city has actually been pretty conservative or cautious in terms of how it's used TID.
Matt, I see you nodding.
I can
Go for it.
Alder Verveer, did you have something you wanted?
Oh, I don't want to, you know, jump ahead of you, Matt. I was just going to mention to Craig's question in the chat. I don't know that the premise is accurate that there's not political appetite or support for TIF in our community today. As Matt well knows, his shop that reports to him in the city's economic development division has presented to policymakers a series of proposed TIF districts that the city council will be considering next Tuesday. So yes, in the midst of COVID, we have had relatively little activity per se that the policymakers have been asked to approve one way or the other. But I might be, correct me on my count here perhaps, Matt, but I believe that there are at least 5, I think there are 5 TIF related resolutions on the council agenda next Tuesday, dissolving to 25 in you know, next year, allowing for that additional year of affordable housing funding, which will be about $4.9 million, we estimate, and that can be used citywide for affordable housing. But also we're proposing to dissolve TID 35, which is the West Beltline Highway, and then approving brand new TIF districts for Regent Street corridor, largely to fund improvements and development around the triangle. Femrite Drive is another one. Research Park has an amendment before the council next Tuesday. Again, Matt's the expert on all these, not I. But if the finance committee meeting just a couple nights ago on Monday night, where we had each of these TIF items on our agenda, is any indication, there actually, I think, is broad support amongst alders, old and new, for TIF, realizing the value of what a powerful tool it is. So I don't want you know, any of you to take away that for example, tough medicine that the council in large part delivered us in the midst of the social and civil unrest of last summer, and for example, their lack of support for State Street merchants in their time of need equates to a citywide sort of you know, condemnation of business or trying to foster redevelopment. As mentioned in the chat, I think it was by you, Susan, you know, once alders realize the value of TIF, they all you know, ask Matt and his colleagues, can I have one in the district I'm elected to represent? So although about half of the city council is brand new this year, since last April, it seems to me that the education that they've received recently from the TIF staff, who had a training, a seminar, an educational program for the newly minted alders on TIF just a few weeks ago, has paid dividends. And I, for example, see no known controversy at next Tuesday's council meeting regarding the creation of these new TIDs certainly dissolving a couple TIDs, including the one we're here talking about, and allowing for Research Park to have even more dynamic development through an amendment to their TID. So that might have been largely, Matt, what you were going to just say. So sorry if I took that away from you, but I know you can elaborate on any and all that I've just articulated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, Jason is absolutely correct that the city of Madison is conservative, relatively speaking, with our use of TIF. We're still at, I think right now we're at about 2.6% of our equalized value within TIF districts. And under state law, we're allowed to go up to 12%. So there's clearly a lot more capacity for the city to use TIF than we're currently using. And to Alder Brevere's point, I think that TID 25 is actually an important lesson that I think we need to continue to reinforce with the council, especially these new alders. As Alder Brevere mentioned, when you take the alders that were just elected this year, coupled with the new alders elected in 2019, Alder Brevere is among a few alders that have been around for more than 4 years at this point. TID 25, one of the exciting things about TID 25, and one of the reasons that from a city perspective it has been a success, is that it has really allowed us to build the Wilson Street Garage. We probably would not have been able to afford the Wilson Street Garage if it were not for the significant TIF investment that was provided into that. One of the amendments that Alder Brevere referenced that's before the council next week is to use TID 46 funding, which is the Exact Sciences Research Park TID, to help pay for some of the BRT stations on the west side of Madison. And I think that, what we need to do, maybe a better job of working with our policymakers, is really drawing that connection with, through TIDs, we can make very important private development projects occur, which will generate significant tax increment that in turn, we as a city and all cities can then use to help fund very important public infrastructure, whether it's the Wilson Street Garage or BRT stations or any other types of public infrastructure that we've used TID and that other communities use TID to fund. And I think that sometimes gets lost in the discussion where the focus is on, well, what are we getting when we invest in some of these private development projects? And what we get through these TID districts is the opportunity to not only get some great private development, which we need, but we have the opportunity to fund affordable housing. We have the opportunity to fund other projects that as a community we feel is important. And so I think TID 25 is actually a good example of where early on we invested in some great private development projects, and 25 years later, we have now an important piece of public infrastructure that wouldn't have been possible if we didn't make those investments 20 years previously.
If I could also add quickly, another example where I am very optimistic about the future political support for TIF in our community, especially though as represented by my Common Council colleagues, is the fact that I am really optimistic that as we move forward creating a new Greater State Street area TIF district, something that Matt and his colleagues and the mayor are all committed to doing and hoping to have that in place at the beginning of next year, that there will be broad support for the creation of a new Greater State Street area TID to help provide the power of that funding source and spur redevelopment of the area that obviously has suffered in absolutely unprecedented ways in the last year. Additionally, as Matt well knows, he and his staff have also committed to amending the only long-term downtown TID 45, which is Capitol Square West, that was largely created to provide support for ULI's anchor bank redevelopment. And we hope to amend that TID 45 in the new year as well to expand the boundaries of it, provide important public infrastructure improvements in the downtown area, and take advantage of new development that has been approved in that area, but not yet constructed. So I am optimistic that the additional efforts that our TIF staff are working toward in the new year in the downtown area also will be warmly received by the policymakers in City Hall.
That's all wonderful to hear. We know this tool is important, and we know that, downtown is why we're all here this morning, and we want to see it bounce back and be stronger for more folks into the future. I want to maybe open it up, Jason, unless you disagree, to some more questions from the group. One that came up on the chat, and then maybe we'll open it up, is from Bill Connors. If Matt or maybe even Jason could talk about the but-for test in creating TIF districts. We hear people say this development is not asking for any TIF assistance, but let's put it in a TIF district anyways so we can use the money for city purposes. So I guess maybe explain what the but-for test is, and maybe give some reaction to that comment that we sometimes hear and the validity of that. Matt or Jason, I
guess I can start off from the city's perspective, and Jason, if you want to provide a more statewide perspective. I mean, the under state law, when using TIF funds and setting up a TIF district, one needs to demonstrate that but for the use of TIF, the development that you want to see within that district would not occur. And the most common way that but for is demonstrated is through a financial analysis that shows that financially projects would not occur, although there is some room to expand beyond just a strict financial view. And I think 25 is a good example of that, where it's not just the development that occurred within that neighborhood, but that entire area of downtown likely would not have redeveloped if it was not for those investments into 25. And I don't know, Jason, if you have a broader perspective to share on that.
Well, I mean, the challenge with these things is always, if we had a time machine where we could just, not do it and then come back from the future and say whether or not it happened, then we would never make any mistakes with these but-for tests, and we would be in great shape. Although people probably start trying to game the time machine, then, you'd run into that. But I think, the first thing about Madison is it's not using, TIF to the, for better or worse, to the degree that some other places are. So, I think, if you're just living within the city of Madison, again, you may have the impression that there's just so much, but it's, to put it in perspective, the city is being cautious, and there's reason for that too, because again, the property tax for a city in Wisconsin is almost the only game in town. We have a little bit of room taxes that we can use for public purposes, although those have definitely not been there over the past 18 months. So, the city does need to be cautious about when it says, okay, yes, we have this one tax and we're going to, set it aside for something for a period of time. The one other thing I would say is there's also just the issue of, in a vibrant community like Madison, you're always going to have development, I think. But there is a question of, okay, how do you want it to happen? And if you want it to happen in a really specific way for some public reason, then that's going to sometimes can be more challenging if you're leaving the market, up to its, leaving the market on its own for that. So, I think, that's sort of the larger, yin and yang of it.
Okay, one last question before I think we're going to open this up is, we know that TIF isn't often used directly to pay for upfront affordable housing costs, but obviously TID district money generated within TIDs can be used for affordable housing, which is an area of great interest to this committee. Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about how that works and what the affordable housing impacts have been from the various TIDs in Madison?
Sure, happy to. Because again, I think this is one of those important conversations that we need to have as a community, which is the investment in non-affordable housing, private development projects really provides the resources to do the affordable housing projects. And there's really two ways that the city has utilized TIF to help fund affordable housing projects. The first is to directly fund a project from Increment from a TIF district while that TIF district is open. And affordable housing projects, they're often the cost often exceeds the revenue that they generate because they're affordable. The rents are suppressed, and so there's less money available to make the development project happen. The other thing that happens, though, is that they're also worth less. Affordable housing projects usually do not have a significant assessed value, or it's certainly depressed assessed value. And so again, this is why it's very important to be funding those office projects and retail projects and mixed use projects, because they generate the increment within the district that can then be used to help fund the affordable housing that wouldn't otherwise be able to generate that increment on their own. So that's the first way that we use TIF to fund affordable housing. The second way is once a TID district is closed under state law, we're allowed to capture an extra year of increment to direct to affordable housing. And in the city of Madison, what we do is we direct that funding into the city's affordable housing fund. And I think we're at this point well over $20 million that we've gained from the closure of TID districts that then we're able to use for affordable housing, regardless of whether the project's in a TIF district or not in a TIF district. For lack of a better term, that money becomes sort of free and available for us to use outside of the normal parameters of TIF. And so, we've had tremendous success with using closed TIDs for that purpose. And certainly it's something that we need to continue to work on. Another good reason to use TIF more broadly in the community, because we can then capture upon the closure of those districts that funding to put into our affordable housing fund.
Yes. Very powerful tool for that as well. Susan, I think we're going to unmute you. You've had a lot to say in the chat, and you are an expert in certainly downtown, but and in TIF. And I'm sorry I got the date on the white paper wrong. And I didn't even realize we had that cheat sheet on Block 89 and impact. So I want to get you off the chat and on the mic and see if you had anything else you wanted to add or ask.
Actually, I don't. Sorry, I've been in the chat all the time. I mean, I have nothing else to say except this is just such a phenomenal tool, and one of the best things that DMI did, I know, and is still doing, thank you, all of you and Jason, is pushing this amazing tool. Because when I came to DMI, it was a very misunderstood tool. Mike remembers that. And it was, and all the talk about its developer welfare, et cetera, and DMI had to really fight against that. And DMI did a really good job with that, and they did it by educating the alders, the public, I remember the piece that Dean Mosman did years ago. Mike, remember how good that was? What TIF is and what it isn't and stuff. So, but I think it just shows that we need to keep that up, because people don't just naturally understand it. It's kind of a weird, complex kind of thing, but once you learn the basics of it, it's like, wow, this is an amazing tool, and we've used it very well. So anyway, thank you. Thanks, Ann. I appreciate it. I just love this conversation. It's terrific. Thank you.
All right. Morgan had a question. We can unmute you, or I can read it from the chat, was earlier in the chat, which was about how are other cities using TIF that Madison might be able to learn from. And I'm sure there are many answers to that question, but I think one thing that folks are also interested in is pay as you go versus upfront TIF, if that's not too wonky.
I'll pop in with a
TIF is wonky. Yeah.
I'll pop in with something quick to Morgan's question. So, because there aren't a lot of other options for communities trying to do projects, you see TIF used for some unusual things. So in Milwaukee, I'm sure everybody is familiar with the HOP. And to be clear, I'm not advocating for or against this. The policy forum doesn't do advocacy. but TIF has been a very significant financing tool for the city there to do, besides federal grants, to do the HOP. And we did a report on that. In some ways, I think we were skeptical of that, but I think of that use. But I think in one, it was not. We understood why the city used it that way, and they used it that way because in terms of other local financing tools for doing a project like that, they really didn't have many, or if any. So you can see some pretty unusual examples or interesting examples if you look around the state for how it's being used.
Anybody want to jump in on pay as you go versus upfront, or is that too wonky? And I think there's also obviously some tax changes that have made folks who use TIF to help their investments, help spur investment, are feeling that pay as you go is obviously more of you don't have the same tax consequences as you're having with the upfront now. Go ahead, Matt, sorry.
Sure. So just to, for those that aren't intimately familiar with the financial structure of TIF, so there's really two ways to finance a project via TIF. One is sort of the traditional approach, where the city borrows the funding and then the city pays itself back using the increment that's generated from the project. And that's the approach that the city of Madison has always taken. There is another approach, which is the pay-as-you-go or developer-funded TIF, where the actual borrowing is done by the developer, and then the increment over time is directed to the developer to pay off the development loan. The city of Madison has historically gone the route of the traditional funding, largely because of our AAA bond rating and our ability to borrow at a very low interest rate, and at an interest rate that's below what the private sector can borrow at. And so we've never had an issue with turning down a project because we weren't able to borrow for it. That has never been, we've always been able to come to the table once the policymakers decided to fund a project. We've always been able to borrow for that project and fund it in that way. Other communities have used developer-funded TIF historically because they don't have as good of a bond rating. They have more concerns about borrowing because they're smaller communities, or their finances aren't as good as the city of Madison's finances are. However, increasingly, to Ann's point, there's been a recognition that the federal tax changes that were made a few years ago now consider TIF to be taxable income to the developer. And historically, that wasn't the case. And so there is increasingly reasons for why it could be more financially advantageous to go the route of a developer-funded TIF. The city actually, within the city's official TIF policy, developer-funded TIF is allowed. It's just that we've never used it. And that's one of those areas where, as a city, we may need to grow and adapt as those tax laws changed and as financing in general is changing. And it's certainly something that we could do. There's nothing that would preclude the city from using developer-funded TIF. But I think it is important to note that the city has never turned down a project because of our inability to borrow. There's certainly been other reasons that many of you have read in the paper why we've turned down projects, but it's never been because we haven't had the capacity to borrow for it.
And Matt, you're allowed as a community to mix those financing methods within the same TID, right? So in other words, just because you start out within a TID as in a traditional financing, you could do an amendment that would include some PAYGO, right?
Yes. Yep. It is project specific.
We have about 3 minutes left. I thought I saw some hands up. Matt, I see you smiling. Matt Trammell, I don't know if you had a question. Think you might have earlier. I saw a hand go up and down.
No, yeah, thanks, Ann. I do. I hope it's not too late. I live
No, you got it.
I live on the east side in the 16th district, kind of by Monona Drive and Tompkins. And I actually ran for alder in this district. And one of the things that I was talking a lot about is, more and better development on Monona Drive from Broadway all the way north, essentially to Old Brick Gardens. And so my primary question is kind of a practical one. What is the mechanism that we can use to try and to create a TIF district in a certain place? And then I also understand that the west part of Monona Drive, essentially, I believe, is Monona, but there is a lot of potential over here on that stretch.
I'm happy to give my initial thoughts on that. That's a great question. First and foremost, the city of Monona actually has been using TIF very proactively to support just that tremendous amount of development that's been happening kind of in that Broadway, kind of around the river type area. Mm-hmm. And so Monona, has certainly on the leading edge of using TIF. And so for those parts that are in the city of Monona, I've great faith that, they would be able to likely, use TIF because clearly they've already been using it. In terms of the parts of Southeast Madison and Monona Drive that are in the city, we, as a city, the impetus for setting up a TIF district is usually one of two things. Either we have a project that the city desires to invest in, so a TIF district is set up, or we have some public infrastructure related work that we want to do, and we want to capture some increment to use within that neighborhood. So on the east side right now, we have a couple of existing TIF districts. There's the Cottage Grove Road TIF that basically extends from Monona Drive to Stoughton Road. We also have TID 39, which is the industrial TID in the far southeast side. And we're looking to set up, as Alder Verveer mentioned, now kind of jumping the interstate and extending down Femwright Drive in a new TID on the east side of the interstate. So certainly we have the capacity to set up new TIDs on the east side. Again, in the case of Monona Drive, the portion of that's in the city of Monona would fall to Monona to need to do that. But it's certainly we have the capacity to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other last questions? Put them in the chat, throw a virtual hand up. Otherwise, I think we're about to wrap up. I want to thank our panelists. I don't see any. Of course, I've got like 5 screens myself and a bunch of chats. I want to thank Jason, Matt, Mike, Susan. I want to thank our panelists and everybody else who's contributed to this conversation. I've learned a lot about this TID in particular, but also about the direction the city is going and what you're looking at, Matt. And thank you, Jason, for providing the statewide perspective, and Mike for being also the historian for us and for the council. And we just appreciate all you guys do. And I've learned a lot, and I think we all have, and we look forward to more TIF conversations and, also some BRT ones, Mike, but TIF today. And thank you. Thanks all for joining. And I hope we will see you at What's Up Downtown and at future committee meetings. Anything else, Jason?
No, when you say Ann, you say it all. Nice job, Ann.
Okay.
Yeah, nice. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Thank you
Ann.
very much, everybody. We are adjourned.
Great job.
We shop Maxwell Street days today through Sunday.
Oh, yes. Go
Yes.
to Maxwell Street days. Go to Maxwell
Thank you,
Street
Mike.
days.
Thank
4
you.
days. 4 days.